And now, in a shock move, Queensland Tourism Minister Kate Jones has said she will not be contesting the October election, becoming the third cabinet member this week to pull the plug. But Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk is also a little preoccupied at the moment by other matters, having today hit back at what she called bullies.
I will not be bullied, nor will I be intimidated.
Order.
By the Prime Minister of this country, who contacted me this morning and who I made very clear to the
Member
fact
Everton will put his comments through the chair.
my decision.
Now, there might be a few separated families out there who have a different idea of who the bullies are. Joining me now, Queensland Liberal Senator James McGrath. James, thanks for joining us tonight. Look, it's been an extraordinary day in Queensland politics. We've had the resignation of Kate Jones and Anthony Lynham, who joined Coralie O'Rourke. The late mail is that Curtis Pitt might also be going. But we've also seen this extraordinary attack by Premier Palaszczuk against the Prime Minister, who had the temerity to ring her up and ask if she would grant a special exemption for a woman who had come back from Canberra. There hasn't been a case of COVID in Canberra for 60 days and wanted to go to her father's funeral, which is a fairly obvious thing that you'd want to do.
Compassion, common sense, consistency, it's all left Queensland under this Labor government. It's left this Premier who is playing herself as the victim of bullying, just because a Prime Minister called up and said, listen, Premier, can you let this daughter go to her dad's funeral? This is just terrible. Where is the heart? Where is the soul of this Premier who will be so happy to play politics and to put the interest of her party and the interest of herself ahead of compassion for a family that are grieving? What is upsetting Queenslanders at the moment is not that there is rules in place in relation to dealing with coronavirus. What is upsetting Queenslanders is the inconsistency, that you can't dance at a wedding, but you can actually attend a sex party, that someone from the ACT can't go to their dad's funeral, but AFL footballers can come to this state and can quarantine in a nice five-star resort, and other footballers can go and have brawls outside of strip clubs. The issue that we're facing in Queensland is that the Premier is using Dr. Young as a human shield to cover up her own incompetence. This is a Premier who has said, oh, hang on, Queensland hospitals are for Queenslanders, who went on to say she makes tough decisions, and then goes on to say, actually, no, it's the Chief Health Officer who makes all the decisions. The Premier
James,
can't have it both ways.
James, interesting you should mention the Chief Medical Officer today, Dr. Jeanette Young. She came out at a press conference earlier. She said the reason that certain sportsmen and sports officials and film stars had been granted exemptions were because they brought money into Queensland. I thought this was about health. I didn't think this was about politics and the fact that these are events and films that bring money into Queensland. The other thing I want to raise with you also in relation to her is the Premier told the Prime Minister today that she would pass on his thoughts to Dr. Jeanette Young because it was her that would make the decision. This is where this all falls down, James. You're a politician. You seek advice from bureaucrats. You take it on board and then you make a judgment. That's why you are elected. You are elected to make a judgment. Today's judgment, terrible.
Beyond terrible. The buck stops with us as politicians. The decisions that we are elected to make are decisions we should base on the advice from professionals, but they come down to our own set of judgment, our own values, what drives our ticker, our soul, what's between our two ears. And what we've seen with this Premier is she claims to be making the tough decisions, but when it becomes a bit too difficult for her, she claims she's being bullied and she claims to be the victim, and she does use Dr. Young as this human shield to cover up the Premier's own incompetent and, I'm going to say, quite appalling behaviour in relation to how she's dealing with Queenslanders. Because what it comes down to, look, I'm a bit of a hard nut. You know, I'm not a softie, but this comes down to what I call issues of the heart. This comes down to a daughter wanting to be with her mother and her young 11-year-old sister to say goodbye to her father. And this Premier is playing party politics with this. I don't think she understands how much this is cutting through all of us. Because if there are to be exemptions given for AFL footballers for reasons of the economy, then exemptions should be given for a daughter from Canberra. There have been no coronavirus cases for 60 days. It is. I know I'm not allowed to swear, and I'm getting quite emotional about this, but this is bull. This is so wrong. The Premier needs to be called out on this.
Bollocks.
And it's bollocks. It's beyond bollocks. And I tell you what, Deb Frecklington coming out today, and what Deb said, you know, she took a sledgehammer to the Premier in relation to how the Premier was playing the victim, when in fact, you know who the victim is? It's this girl, this lady, this daughter called Sarah who's stuck in a hotel room. I'm angry I'm even talking about it. We should not be talking about this. You know, the Prime Minister should not have to make a phone call to a Premier to ask her to intercede. People should use their own common sense, their own judgment to do something about this. But what we're facing in Queensland is we've got an election for those people around Australia, we've got an election here in less than 7 weeks' time. And what the Premier is looking at everything through, because she's getting focus groups, she's getting all the polling in from Labor headquarters, saying you've got to be tough on borders, Premier, because that's what the mob want. Because the mob do want a tough Premier, but they want a Premier who's got compassion, who's got common sense and consistency, because the Labor Party in Queensland have got nothing. They can't run on their track record, and that's why these ministers are leaving, because they know this government has got nothing going for it. And at the moment, it doesn't even have a soul. And that's the worst thing you can say about any human being. This Premier doesn't have a soul, has no compassion, has no heart when it comes to dealing with families.
Yeah, James McGrath, I think today was a red letter day in Queensland politics. I think a lot of Queenslanders finally realised that this is a government that is not a very good government. It hasn't been a good government on a whole range of things. It hasn't been a good government on the economy. It's failed on child safety. It's failed on youth crime. It's got integrity issues. But today was the cream on the cake. Senator McGrath, thanks for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Anytime. Thanks, Clay. Toodaloo.